If a parent calls me and they say, I think my kid is trans or gender expansive, and we need them to be in therapy to get a handle of this. And I'll say, what do you mean by get a handle of this? Well, we need to talk them out of it. This isn't how we want to raise our child. And I always say very quickly, that's a really scary thought, but I'm not the right therapist for you or for the family, because that is not how I practice. I work with people to celebrate who they are and their identity, not to tell someone else how they should live their life or not.
What do you really know about people who are born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Well, welcome to another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey, brought to you by Women Who Push the Limits. I'm one of your hosts, Lynn Murphy. I'm the founder of Women Who Push the Limits and author of the best-selling book, 50 Life Lessons from Inspiring Women. Your other host today is the amazing Wendy Cole, who transitioned at the age of 67. So we've got kind of a unique setup here between a cisgender woman and a transgender woman, and we've been told that there aren't really many people doing what we're doing. Our goal is to educate people about the misinformation and disinformation and things that are just plain wrong about some of the things that they hear in the news and on social media. So we want to educate people by having these conversations, sharing real people's stories, and digging into what's going on. We think that by hearing the stories, we think it's going to change people's minds about some of the things that they hear that are not correct. So we're sharing different perspectives, these authentic journeys, and with our goal to educate and have conversations about the topic of demystifying the transgender journey. And we are so grateful that you, our audience, are here today. And we're even more grateful to have an amazing person joining us today as our guest, David Blackert. David is a Los Angeles-based psychotherapist and proud gay dad who specializes in working with the LGBTQIA plus community through an affirming, culturally sensitive, and strengths-based approach. His practice is rooted in the belief that healing begins when clients feel seen, valued, and empowered to embrace the fullness of who they are. David's focus is working with people in this community and other marginalized communities who are in their teens and their 20s, as well as their parents. His clients find David to be especially gifted at helping them navigate anxiety, self-esteem issues, relationship dynamics, and identity-based trauma, as he draws on a deep understanding of how homophobic, transphobic, and heterosexism have impacted mental health. This is an important part about the mental health. Now, before becoming a therapist, this is a kind of an unusual path to becoming a therapist, but David spent 25 years as a successful copywriter and creative director in the advertising industry, a background that continues to inform his creative and narrative-driven therapeutic style. He remains passionate about storytelling, which is what we're all about, contributing for over a decade to Gays with Kids, a parenting resource for gay, bi, and trans dads and dads-to-be. Outside of his clinical work, he's not always in the office, even though it probably feels like it to him. David writes screenplays and enjoys life with his husband and their teenage son. Whether in the therapy room or on the page, David is dedicated to helping people find meaning, connection, and pride in their stories. So today we're so honored that David is going to be sharing his story. David, thank you so much for being here today. Wendy and I are just delighted that you agreed to talk to us.
Absolutely. It's my honor.
So let's start out. Share a little bit about your background.
Sure.
And how your background influences where you are today, and how you went from being an advertising person to being a clinical psychologist.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that lovely intro. It's wonderful to be here with both of you. I am a big fan of what this project is all about, and that's enlightening and sharing stories, right? Because that's how we really learn from one another. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and when I was 23, I think I moved to Los Angeles. to pursue a screenwriting and copywriting kind of profession. When I was going to undergrad, I remember telling my parents that I wanted to major in film, and they were kind of like, "Well, how about that and something that we can, rely on for you to make money?" And so that's where advertising came in. I thought I can still tell little stories in little bits. And so dual majored in film and advertising, then came out to LA and quickly went down into the advertising agency world and started out as a junior copywriter all the way to a group creative director towards the end of my time in advertising, which was about 25 years. About 7 years ago, I transitioned into a world of psychotherapy. And it was something that I always wanted to do. That sounds a little cliche, but when I was a little kid and my parents would ask me, what do I want to be? I said I wanted to be a psychologist. And they would say, why? And I would say, because of the experience that I have as a young boy in elementary school who has a therapist that I get to see once a week, and knowing how I felt when I would leave those sessions, I wanted to be able to help other people to achieve that same feeling. The thing is, my parents, who are outstanding and very attuned to me, as well as guidance counselors and teachers in high school, they all said when I told them I wanted to be a therapist, "Oh, well, you're so sensitive. You have so much empathy and so much compassion that it might work against you. It might be too much for you. It might be internalizing other people's stuff." And because I was so sensitive, they thought that maybe that would not be best for me. So it made sense to me, and I kind of put that on the back burner and followed my creative pursuits. But the feeling was always there throughout my life. When I was at work, I would always be that person organically that people were drawn to talk about things that are going on in their lives, or whether it be my friends or my neighbors. And so it got to a point where I felt I think maybe I should be doing this. I think maybe there's something to be said about helping people to heal. And after 2 decades in advertising, it was fun and the money was good, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled, and I wasn't feeling like anything I was doing was really making a difference. And in raising my son and him becoming a teenager, I kept thinking about this quote that always stayed with me, and that is, be who you needed when you were younger. And that is what attracted me to therapy and to finally say, I've lived 40 years at this point. I can go back to graduate school, I can get my degree, and I can become a clinical psychologist or a psychotherapist. And that's what I did. Yeah.
So you had experience at an early age. I haven't heard a lot of people who've had therapy at that young age.
Yes.
How did
Yes.
that come about?
Well, I come from a family that is sort of half therapy is amazing and great and can help one get in touch with themselves, and other family members that were kind of raised a little bit more, in a generation where that's implies that there's something wrong with you and what are people going to think? And luckily, my parents supported the idea while I was in elementary school and I was having some, maybe I wasn't so aware of it at the time, but I think some stuff about feeling different from the other boys in school. And I think my parents picked up on that and made the decision to have me spend an hour a week with a psychologist. And it was a really magical experience where during that 50 minutes, I felt seen and I felt like I didn't have to put on an act even as a young person, that I didn't have to pretend to like the rock music that my friends liked or know all the scores to the Eagles games or the Flyers or the Phillies. And so it felt like a mini vacation when I got to just be myself.
So you
Yeah,
had that creative side early on that
I
wasn't
did.
necessarily the heteronormative
No, it
way
wasn't
to.
for me. No, I was born in the late 70s, and in the 80s, boys didn't gravitate towards art and music and things that were really creative and expressive and emotional. And I was inclined towards those things. And so it made me feel different than everybody because those were the after school activities that I wanted to participate in. And yet there weren't those real options, at least not a lot of them.
I remember you, in all honesty and openness to the audience, I've known David for decades.
True.
And I remember you back in those days. You were always very creative. You loved your writing. You wrote beautifully. And I remember sitting on your bed watching you write something. It was just a delight. You were different from a lot of the other guys, but I thought it was great.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And even I knew I was different. That difference that we're speaking of, it wouldn't be until years later that I would really truly understand
Embrace it.
and embrace it. Instead, I fought against it. I kind of went into something in the therapy world we call code switching, even from an early age. And what that means is I would be one way publicly, then when I'm alone or in a place that I deem safe and where I can be comfortable. And everything from the way that I spoke to the way that I dressed to the music that I would listen to or the TV shows that I would watch or the magazines that I would read. There was a very public version of that, which was
Mhm.
what all the other boys are into. And then there was the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember the 80s. I was well into my adult time in life, and that was really a dangerous time for men to be gay.
Yes.
There were
Yeah,
the AIDS epidemic. People didn't know what had caused that. There weren't the
absolutely.
treatments. There was the isolation. Did that
Yeah.
influence anything? Were you aware of that at the time?
Entirely influenced. I mean, people on a playground might call me gay or girly when I was in elementary school. Didn't really knew what that meant, but knew that it wasn't something that I wanted to be because people would laugh. And so it just made me kind of go insular and play down the things that were suggesting to other people that I was girly or that I might be gay. Every message that I was exposed to growing up in the 80s, whether I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, was that gay was bad, less than, not something that we would choose or want to be. Every TV show that had a storyline about a gay person, it portrayed them as the victim of something, the victim of bullying, the victim of discrimination, the victim of not being the good athlete. They were often the people that were laughed at. If you were watching a talk show, like Jerry Springer, for example, the only exposure that we would see were gay and queer people almost being the butt of the joke. And so every message conditioned me to think that is not something that I am okay to be, that I'm allowed to be, that I should choose to be. And this was even before I understood the physical and emotional dynamics of what constitutes sexuality. But I couldn't turn off the things that were inherently me. And so as I got older and entered more kind of the high school years, I would find myself dating women, being attracted to women. And the more I would maybe get made fun of, the more women I would seek out to prove to the world and myself, I'm not what you're saying I am. This is my girlfriend. And because physically everything was enjoyable for me with these lovely women, I had a hard time differentiating between a physical dynamic with a woman and an emotional kind of attraction to somebody. And because physically everything was a-okay, I thought, oh, I mustn't be gay. Gay is sex. That is what TV and politicians and people at the playground and at school, they say being gay is a sex act. And that was what I grew up in my formidable years believing. Gay is not a sex act. There's sex acts in all relationships. What I didn't understand then that I would later learn is that being gay is also very much an emotional connection and sense of normalcy with somebody of the same sex, same gender. And so it was the hardest lesson that I ever had to learn. All my life, I was emotionally drawn to men. My best friends who were straight cis men, I would always want to spend time with them. I would want to be there for them when they were having problems, if there was a death in the family or they were doing badly in a certain class. I would want to tutor them. I was pulled to my straight male friends. I just wanted to be around them. I just wanted to have a deep relationship with them. Never felt that way with women. I get along wonderfully with women, but there wasn't that feeling of this is what love feels like. That is something that I would have with the men in my life. Once I was finally able to realize being gay is, hi, honey, I'm home. And having that person you love there and eating dinner together, doing fun projects together and watching TV together, it's not a sex act. That is a very kind of dated sense. That is what gay is. It's an act. Gay is who you are in your being. While there are many differences between a gay person and somebody who's trans, what's similar is that you just are this thing, and it was the way that you were born. And then at different phases in your life, it might start to show, come out. But to deny it is basically denying yourself. And that's
Mhm.
exhausting. Just as exhausting
Oh,
as it was for me to code switch all the time, to live a double life. And it's so draining.
it is totally.
Yeah, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you more than any of us, knowing your story and everything that you've shared.
When I was living in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and had a lot of my gay friends, there were so many parallels to our lives. And that's the beauty of everything you just related. It parallels everything that a transgender person would feel and experience growing up, going through childhood, all of that. You kind of know, but because of the socialization, you know how wrong it is. That was beautiful, David.
Well, and David, you're working with teens and with people in their 20s. So,
Yeah.
feeling different growing up, Wendy just said, you've got the parallels with people who were born transgender. So, how does your background, how do you use your background of feeling different? Not that you're transgender, but growing
Sure.
up gay, how does that
Yeah.
influence how you work with your transgender clients?
Well, every person has their own specific and unique story. I think I come from a place of looking at every relationship and every conversation through a lens of affirming somebody's story, meeting people where they're at, not trying to change minds, but to unconditionally embrace and support somebody for exactly who they are, where they are at that point in time. I think because I promote myself as a gay man, a cis gay man, and I'm a father. I have a husband. I put that out there on all my marketing materials, not because I am someone who really loves oversharing. I just think that somebody who has felt othered in their life, whether it be in elementary school, whether it be in college or in their adult years, there's a shared language and a shorthand with knowing when you're amongst company, so to speak, or amongst family in that expression of someone else who might be queer or someone else who might be on a journey where they grew up feeling less than or othered or not allowed to be their full authentic selves. And I think that comes across. I always do a free consultation with prospective clients, and I'm pretty upfront about how I work and how I look at psychotherapy as a way to hold a mirror up for clients so they can see themselves in this time together and that I can model something for them that may have been missing in their own lives. And by that, I mean these folks may have never sat across from somebody who loves them exactly the way that they are. Not that some of the people in their lives don't mean well, but to have someone say, you are absolutely perfect just as you are today. Nothing could ever change, and exactly who you are is who you're meant to be, and it's beautiful. And then I'm not afraid to challenge clients when I think they're telling themselves things that might not be serving them well. But what I found, I guess, to answer the very specific question is it's a gift to sit across from somebody and have them open up and share and be vulnerable. So, what I want to do with that gift is reflect back to these individuals, regardless of their age, that this is a place where they don't have to be anybody else other than who they are. And I get that, but I get it from my perspective. I want to understand your perspective, right?
Mhm.
I don't talk about myself in sessions other than the fact that I'm gay and I'm married and I have a kid. That's pretty much all people really know about me. But that alone breaks the ice. That alone makes it feel like this is a safe space because while our stories are different, there are a lot of those things, as Wendy were saying, that are crossover between their life and my life.
And I'm sure your clients can sense that in you, even though you don't go into all of your details, because it
Yeah.
sounds like you're really a gift to the clients that you work with.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. What I say to everybody is this work has its tough days, but it is a privilege to be welcomed into people's inner worlds.
Yeah.
And it never gets boring. It never feels old because every day is a new story and a new emotion that we get to explore together. I think that is what has helped my success in having a pretty steady flow of clients. Up front, if a parent calls me and they say, I think my kid is trans, or they're saying that they're like gender expansive. We need them to be in therapy to get a handle of this. And I'll say, well, what do you mean by get a handle of this? Well, we need to talk them out of it. This isn't how we want to raise our child. I always say very quickly, that's a really scary thought, but I'm not the right therapist for you or for the family because that is not how I practice. I work with people to celebrate who they are and their identity, not to tell someone else how they should live their life or not. And some people are surprised at my directness or my willingness to turn clients away, but I can't be a part of that. So I'm not.
Asking you for conversion therapy.
Yeah, no, it's, exactly. And listen, I tell parents that are really wanting their kids to be in therapy and talking about wanting them to not be what they are telling their parents they are. And I say something, and it can be very sobering, but I say to the parents, do you want a trans daughter or do you want a dead daughter? Either way, she's a daughter. And in one way, she's in your life, and the other way, she's not. And that's hard for people to hear, but I've had enough experience in this work where there is a disproportionate number of preteens and teenage folks who are trans or somewhere on the spectrum figuring out their kind of gender story. And the rates of suicidal ideation and thoughts and desires for self-harming are exponentially higher with this population than any other minority group or population of that same age. And I've met with enough of these kids to know that not allowing these folks to be who they are and getting them the care that they need to become who they are and to create safe spaces for them to have conversations about who they are is harmful. And I'm very direct about that with the people that I meet with if they're not aligned with the fact that it's not about stopping something that's not wrong. It's about making someone feel okay to be who they are. And that is what we sign up for as parents. Don't have kids if there are conditions on having kids.
Well, and when you get parents, even if they're willing to accept this, but it seems to me that parents might be surprised, shocked, not know what to do when their child is questioning or when they decide to come out.
And that's understandable.
It is understandable. So, how do you work with parents? Give our audience some advice or some ideas about how to
Sure.
deal with their own confusion, their own,
Their own grief, really.
yeah, grief.
Absolutely. And I have clients who are just that. They're parents of kids who are on this journey and tell them that it's wonderful that you're here, that you're having this conversation, that you're not home going online and getting into all these Reddit articles, cherry picking certain stories, but rather you are exploring your feelings. And the fact that they made the phone call, the fact that they're spending the money to be there tells me that they have good intentions. They may be confused, they may not understand. Here's the thing, our kids don't need to understand. Our kids don't need you to understand them. Our kids need you to be curious and want to hear what they have to say. and they want to have a seat at the table when it comes to their life and who they are and how they look and how they live. So when I work with these parents, it's usually going through a lot of psychoeducation. It's talking through communication skills on how we can come from a place of curiosity, not criticalness, not going to our kids with a finger pointing, you can't dress like that, you can't be that way, but more like, what do you feel when you're going to get in the morning and you're picking out what you're going to wear? Picking that shirt, how does that make you feel? Let's focus on the feelings and look under what the end result is. The end result is a manifestation of something. Let's look at what's just beneath the surface. That's where the work is, right? Not that I like to have a pink tank top, but what that symbolizes. How would I feel wearing that versus how would I feel wearing the clothes that my mom and dad buy me that might not feel like I'm being me? Coming from a place of curiosity is the answer with parents. Seeking out their own therapy and allowing themselves to have their feelings, have their grief, grieving the version of your son or daughter that you imagined them to be, right? We have to give our parents time to adjust to this massive change. By not doing that and expecting that parents are just going to be, okay, whatever you say, I support, that's a fantasy. Obviously, kids should always feel supported and affirmed and loved and all those things, but it wouldn't make sense for a parent to believe one way their whole life and just to suddenly change their mind. That's not what we're asking. You take the time you need, talk to the people that you need to talk to, do some research, read some books. But when you're doing your research and you're reading books, it needs to be by people who've been through this, not by some talking head who is maybe having an agenda when they put their books together, right? Talk to people who've worn these shoes. Talk to other parents who have children that have been on this journey and that will tell you the watch outs and will tell you the benefits of what happens when you just hold out your arms and say, hey, come here. You're you and you're my kid. And that is all I care about. The rest of the stuff, we want to make sure you're safe. We want to make sure you're healthy. We want to make sure you make rational decisions that aren't impulsive. And we'll figure this out. You know, that's what we're aiming for. That's what I try to do with these parents. And again, I meet them where they're at. If someone comes in and they are completely a mess, with all these fears and changes, I don't tell them they shouldn't feel that way. They should feel this way. It's real. They should have their thoughts. They should have their concerns. They should allow themselves to feel stuff so then they can get over that and then get to the okay. So, what are we going to do here? How are we going to help our kid be the best version of themselves that they can be?
Do you advise them to share those fears and feelings with their kids or to keep them more to themselves? How does that work in that environment?
It's a great question. I don't want to guide parents into putting anything additional on their kids that aren't the kids' responsibility. It is not the kids' responsibility to take care of how mom and dad react and respond to this. That's that starts to be like parentification, and there is enough on that little kid's plate right now than to have to take care of siblings and how it's going to be for them and parents. They can have empathy for the fact that this is going to be a lot for my family, but no, I don't think any of those things should be addressed with the kid. However, a parent is a parent. And so when we're talking about things like smart, healthy, rational decisions, choices, who we spend time with, when we come home, how we leave the house dressed, expressing ourselves is very necessary. But like all parents, there are rules and there are boundaries and there are limitations. And I respect parents feeling as though we get a say in what happens here, but we're not going to get a say where we dictate to you who you are. You know what I mean? There's a difference between that.
Well, and
I,
safety seems like one issue too, that there's got to be a balance and safety there when you're talking
but
about how you get dressed in the morning.
when you brought up safety, I think it's important to say when your parents or your caregivers, whoever's raising you, if you do the things that are advised regarding how we have this conversation with our kids, the chances of them doing things that are unsafe go way down, right? If we kick our kids out of the house, the kids are going to be exposed to some really dark things that can happen outside of the house. If we keep our kids surrounded by love and support and letting them know that this is where they belong and nothing's going to change that, they're not going to feel compelled to learn things the hard way because there's a safety net around them. I always tell parents, our job is not to be shields. Our job is to be safety nets. Let kids make up their minds and learn things sometimes and learn from those choices. Nothing is more educational than our own regrets. That's when we really learn. So, in that regard, I think it's really important for parents to talk to other people who've been through this, to talk to therapists or whatever therapy looks like for you. It could be meeting with your pastor or at a temple with a rabbi. It doesn't have to be sitting in a room doing therapy, but we need an outlet. These parents need an outlet. They can join PFLAG. They can go online where they can find a Facebook. They don't have to speak. They can just observe and see that the very fears that they have are the fears that everybody in that circle has, right? And then when this woman over here tells the story about their child who transitioned in high school, it's so informative. And there's this sense of it gets better, not just for the child going through this transition, but for the parents to know now my trans child is in college and is studying what she wants to study, and she has her friend group, and she's found her tribe of people that make her feel she can just be who she is. That gives the other new parent so much hope, you know? It makes them feel that, okay, there is another narrative here. It doesn't just have to be the narrative that we see in the press where it's fear tactics and this is going to happen and that's going to happen. The facts are that those bad things only happen when a lot of people come together and perpetuate false things that are just not true.
So you talked earlier about parents looking at Reddit and things like that. And we know that there's so much on the social media and in the news
Yeah.
that kids can go there and look at certain things, but politicians, rule makers are trying to ban certain books, certain things that they don't want children exposed to
Yeah.
because they don't want them to be turned. So how important is it that people who are transgender in their youth have positive representations of someone who's transgender?
It makes all the difference. It makes all the difference. Visibility is the thing that I speak to often in sessions. Look for the people that are visible. Look for the people that are allies. Put your focus on them. There's so much noise that you have to navigate through to get to those people that are healing, that are helping, that are in this fight. I always say, this kind of metaphor, scare tactics and trying to get parents to fear this or fear that. It's kind of like when you have a toddler and you build a beautiful pool in your backyard. That toddler wants to get into that swimming pool, right? But the toddler might not know how to swim. So you build a wall or a fence to protect it. The thing is, if that toddler wants to get into that pool and swim as much as they do, they will find a way to get over that fence and get into the pool. So don't you think that we should teach that kid to swim? And so when it comes to gender or sexuality, pretending that we can just put up a big wall to stop these things from happening aren't going to change anything. All it does is make the person have to have a harder time getting to where they ultimately should be. As parents, we don't want to be the road bumps. We don't want to be the thing that makes something that's already the hardest thing in the world even harder, right? If you come from it with curiosity and wanting to understand, you don't have to agree. You don't have to believe what I believe, but just understand my perspective. Put on my shoes. Just walk in them so you can understand my perspective. Someone else cannot tell someone their perspective doesn't matter.
True. Very true.
They can say it all they want. It's not going to change anything.
hmm Back in the last century and the first decade of this one, you didn't hear too much about transgender. Back
No.
in those days, I was considered a transsexual.
Hmm.
There were others who were considered transvestites.
Yep.
Today, you're now transgender.
Hmm.
We're all part of this one big conglomerate
Yeah. Yeah.
that spans from non-binary, gender fluid to the cross-dressers
Mhm.
to the transsexuals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a lot for people in cisgender straight society, especially, but I even learned it in gay society too.
Hmm.
It's not fully comprehended.
Yeah.
And I think changing their perspectives is going to be from doing exactly what we're doing now, having an open conversation about all of this,
Yeah.
which I think is really hugely important. What's your perspective on why all of a sudden in the 20 teens and now the 2020s and all, we're seeing so many more transgender people to the point where the politicians are able to use it to divide society?
Yeah. It's a great question. In my own lifetime, I have seen this shift. I've observed it. I know what it was like in the early 2000s or the late 90s when some of these themes would come up. And then I would see that in, I think, 2012, you started to see certain rights, certain protections, certain medical support being made available for individuals who are trans. And as soon as that happened, and as soon as we started to have people in TV shows and on reality shows and people in schools that are trans, it started to create this thing of, okay, this is happening. We're evolving a little bit. And what we don't know, we'll ask some questions. And the world didn't end. And nothing bad happened in classrooms. The more that happened, and the more the stories get told, like this podcast, whether it be documentaries, movies, side characters on TV programs, that's when it starts to feel normalized. Once this thing feels normalized, we start to realize we all know someone who knows someone. The more it happens, and we see that nothing bad is really happening other than people feeling like they can live in their own skin, you start to see that change. Now, that change can also start to upset people that don't know. They just don't know. They don't have exposure. They've never met anybody. They don't watch the type of shows or programs or movies that might show different kinds of characters. And many of these people are lovely people, but their ignorance to this thing makes them scared. What they don't
Mhm.
know makes them scared. What they can't understand makes them scared. And so the answer is learn, do some research, but talk to real people who have worn these shoes, not people that are telling you this is going too fast. The world is changing too fast. Minorities of all different types, shapes, sizes have fought for decades and decades. This is not fast. But, you know, as bad as some people rightly say things are right now for the trans community when you put on the news, we can't forget that 15 years ago, they were worse,
A
right?
lot worse.
And I don't want to downplay or sound like I'm not paying close enough attention to someone's lived experiences right now, but it is important to understand that this is like reciprocal. This goes in a circle, depending on politics and stuff. But we can't forget that we've come so far for the whole
Right.
entire LGBTQ plus community. We've come so far. When I'm speaking to a client who's 23 and trans, I'm not going to focus on you should be appreciating right now where you're at because of
Right. That won't work.
that's not going to work because they only know what they know. They only know what it's been like to grow up in their world. This is the first time they're seeing a lot of that messaging that I saw in the 80s about how I shouldn't be gay or how being
Mhm.
gay is bad. these folks are getting worse messages. They're
Right.
getting messages of you don't deserve to have the same rights as every other kid. You don't deserve to be able to go into a bathroom that is the bathroom that you should be going into. You're not allowed to read books that mention a word gay or mention a word trans. If you don't want to read books that have the word gay or trans, don't read those books. But you, stranger, you over there, cannot dictate for other people what they can and can't read.
Ridiculous.
And if you don't want to support the trans community, don't marry a trans person.
Exactly.
It's literally that simple. Drag queen reading a book to a kid is not going to make them want to become a drag queen. That's not
Exactly.
the way that it works.
And no young teenage boy or even younger than that is going to go and put on dresses and do makeup and all that kind of stuff just for fun.
No. I mean, if it's Halloween and we're doing a bit, and great. But if someone's going to do this thing that the world, a lot of the world tells them is bad, and they're going to do it because they can't not do it, that's how important it is,
Yep,
regardless of what this person or that person's telling me. I can't turn this off.
I know.
You know?
Well, and
That's
for the
exactly how I felt at age 10.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't go away either.
yeah.
and for the whole world to lose their stuff over people who are dressing differently. We don't have the Kens and the Barbies if
Mm.
they're dressing. But you look back when I grew up, we had Bob Hope and Bing Crosby who were cross-dressing for God's
Mhm.
sake, you know,
Absolutely.
and Mrs. Doubtfire, and our minds didn't
Absolutely.
explode. We lived through that. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, there's this big thing that people believe.
Do you know the differences between those examples and what we're seeing now? In those examples, it was cis heterosexual people
Mm.
putting on the look. It's different when it's a gay person or a trans person, right?
And why should it be?
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. I just saw a documentary about Pee Wee Herman, which is on HBO, and Paul Rubens, who's the gentleman who created Pee Wee, he said he would not have been able to become Pee Wee Herman if he had come out in 1984 as a gay man. He couldn't have a kids' TV show if he
Right.
was a gay man. And so when you say, why is that? It's okay for a straight person to dress up and put on makeup, a straight cis person. But if it's a gay person, they are trying to indoctrinate people.
So how do you work with parents when they're hearing and seeing all these horrible things about kids are going to school and they're being done
Yeah.
surgery on at school and coming home an opposite and all these things? How do you get through to people? Because you were saying learn, read things, talk to
Yeah.
people, actual things, but there's a population of people that just are so stuck. How do you get them unstuck to where they do talk to people and
If
read?
I had the perfect answer to this, I would probably try to monetize it because it's a question that so many parents come to me with, and I have a few things to say. One is resist. Resist what we don't like, what's happening, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's having some conversations with some other people in the community that may think differently than you. Try talking to them, get them to understand. The other thing that I would say is if you can make your child in the home feel loved and supported and that they are beautiful exactly as they are, that is what we're doing as our job as parents. We cannot control what is out there in sometimes the mean world. I mean, sometimes the world is lovely and amazing, but knowing what we can and cannot control is a big part of it, right?
Mhm.
We can surround our kids with loving, nurturing, supportive people that embrace and celebrate who they are, and then they'll have memories of that. We cannot change what other people do and say. We cannot change what happens in politics. We can vote, that is what we can do, but understanding what is within my control and outside of our control is step number one. Number two is something that I call radical acceptance, where sometimes we have to accept the things that aren't fair. Sometimes we have to accept the things that we don't want to accept. We have to accept things not because we're selling out or we're becoming complicit. It's not that. It's liberating to free yourself of trying to make something a different outcome.
Right.
If my kid hated sports and I love sports, and for years I would try to get him to like sports, but he just doesn't like sports. For me to say, you know what? My kid just doesn't like sports. I'm going to liberate myself from trying to make him love sports, and I'm going to feel this weight is lifted. Now I'm just going to let that go. Don't get me wrong, these things politically, it's not about letting stuff go. It's about being able to accept when there's something you can do and when there's not. And then we just have to keep our kids safe, help them make choices that keep them safe, stay informed, but not obsessed. Know the headlines, but don't spend your entire days spinning out on social media, reading every negative thing that this person says or that person says. If it's important enough, we are going to hear about it. It's not just going to be on some
Mhm.
Twitter or TikTok feed. I try to get folks to stay away from social media when there is a 24/7 news cycle that keeps these negative stories front and center.
There,
You know,
that has that's been such a detriment.
it has. It has. And there's positives to it. I'm not going to say that there's not, but when it comes to fear, you typically take that one fear and then you see the next story and it makes the fear bigger. And then you see the next story and it makes it even bigger to the point where now you really believe all these things as if they are fact, and they're not always fact.
No, they're not.
You
A
know?
lot of things become executive orders, which immediately go into the court system, and
Yeah.
they die there.
Yeah, but it makes a big story, a big headline, and
And
it
upsets
it's
people for
fear.
weeks.
It incites so much fear. I've had so many clients come in, close the door, and just start crying because of just reading a headline about their passports are no longer going to have the correct pronoun
And
and sex listed. And I will say that is a fact. That has happened. I have more than one client who has
Mhm.
come in and said, for the first time in my life, even though I transitioned when I was 6 or 7 and have had passports that have indicated the correct sex, something has changed since January. Some order has been put out there where now these individuals, for the first time, are getting their passports renewed with the sex that was assigned to them at birth.
Right.
And it is devastating for these
Of
people,
course it is.
understandably.
Mhm.
And so of course, those are the individuals that go, what's happening now? Am I safe? And it's really not okay.
No.
Really
When
not okay.
January, after the new regime took over, we heard a lot about people who were suicidal. And
Yeah. I have seen in the last 4 or 5 months something that has blown me away, and that is I don't feel safe walking around. I don't feel safe getting on a bus. I don't feel safe walking into a McDonald's or a restaurant. I feel like there's a target on my back. Literally, just before the new administration went into effect, I'd walk around, I'd dress how I dress, I'd have my hair how I have it, I would be me. Then something shifted, and I felt like all the things that I was maybe taking for granted just overnight stopped. I felt like there is a target on me. I feel there are all eyes on me. I feel like I can't go anywhere without people snickering about me, questioning me, talking about me. And the truth is, sometimes that stuff is irrational. Sometimes that stuff is not. It's hypervigilance. We grow up in a world always having to protect ourselves, so we're hyper aware of our surroundings. But there has been a major shift, hearing that so much more so in the last 4 months than previously.
How much would you say, David, is a result of the repetitive news cycles pushing that out on people to
Yeah.
the point where it's now front and foremost in their minds that this is reality, when
Yeah.
in fact, so much of it is just a lot of noise.
Yeah.
But they aren't able to differentiate between the noise and the
Yeah.
reality of the situation. How do you handle that?
In sessions, we always kind of break down the fear, the worry. We kind of look at it and we try to separate ourselves from it as if we're sitting over here and we're looking at this unfold. And oftentimes, what we try to do is take ourselves out of the situation and think of it from a more kind of grounded lens. And then we say, is this fear something that seems real? What's the likelihood of these bad things happening? And sometimes, like our example with passports, extremely likely because it is
Mhm.
happening.
Right.
But I would say to a client in Los Angeles in the last 4 months, do you know anybody who has been attacked strictly because they are trans? I try to look for evidence to show, okay, well, then what we're worried about is very real. But if there's no evidence and it's just hearsay from the internet, I say that's not real. Some of it might be based on some truth, but ultimately, it's kind of like social constructions. People say, well, this is just what I'm supposed to do, or this is how people are supposed to act, or this is, how much money I'm supposed to have at a certain age. None of that stuff is real. It's just fake noise. Over time, these things grow and they become like a social norm, but they're not real. And so I think certain people in the press and in the world and in politics will take a very vulnerable, small community, such as the trans community, very small, and put so much attention and focus and money against fear messaging. In the grand scheme of life, it is so completely not a real issue or concern or problem. It affects very few people's lives, and yet the amount of time and focus and money that got put into blowing out these messaging to tell a very broad audience that this is bad and this is bad and this is happening. And it is horrific that we pick on a community that is already had to struggle, had to
Yeah.
struggle in society, in their own lives, in their own minds. It's horrifying. So when I sit with parents, let's stay grounded. If we're emotional, we're not going to make any progress. We're not going to be able to make rational, mindful choices here. So we have to get grounded, and then we need to look for evidence. And when we can't find it, maybe we can say that's not a fear we should have. When there is evidence, then let's come back and have this conversation. But right now, this stuff over here is real. So let's just focus on that. Let's not focus on things that there's no evidence and that we can't quite do anything about. So that's something called CBT therapy, cognitive
Right.
therapy, really looking at things as the stories that we tell ourselves. So let's look for evidence. Let's think about what would our wise best friend say to us right now and say that to ourselves. You know what I mean? Or that one person you really trust, that doctor or that therapist, at this moment right now, oh my God, I'm spinning out. I'm so anxious. What can I do? What would that person say to you right now? That's usually the best advice for you to take.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you talk about evidence, we're seeing things that are impacting cis women because they don't look feminine enough. So
I, I
they're
saw
being
I saw that in the news last week.
Yeah.
grabbed out of bathrooms, being told that they don't belong in the bathroom. I mean,
I watched AOC being interviewed by a swarm of reporters on the sidewalk in New York.
Mhm.
And that was one of her statements back was all these trans laws are going to be horrific for women in general.
mhm.
And now
Absolutely.
it's
Set us
happening.
back. Yeah.
If you are too masculine, you're going to get pulled out. Someone's going to stop you in the ladies' room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, ridiculous.
It's exactly what will happen when we scream these things out from a megaphone on all reputable channels, on all reputable newspapers, when we keep showing the footage of these people saying these very wrong, very dishonest things. Yes, it's going to get to a point where you are giving people the voice to now say and do these things in real time, in
Right?
bathrooms, at schools, and that is what they want. That
Yeah.
is what they want.
There weren't problems before until they stirred all this stuff up. But we
Exactly.
talk about evidence.
Exactly.
There was nothing like that before.
And one last thing that I want to say is, what do you do with these parents who are concerned? What do you do with these kids that are concerned? Look for the exceptions. Look for the beautiful stories of love
Mhm.
and open-mindedness, and you will find them if you look for them.
Oh, yeah.
You don't see them in the press. They don't make the 6 o'clock news, but they're there. And if you look hard enough and then go towards that, we can't fix what's happening over here in big government land, but over here in our community, when there's that center where a lot of minority groups come together and there's a place to be who we are and maybe volunteer our time to help littler people that might benefit from our wisdom, that is what we do. Nothing can make you feel better than being for younger people what you needed when you were younger. When there's a lot of scary noise, look for the healers, look for the helpers, look for the exceptions. Where are there good people? Because there are. Even though we don't tend to be as loud, there are good people out there,
Right.
you
Like
know? And like you two ladies, I mean, look what you're doing with this project, trying to debunk silly myths and just educate people through
Right.
real stories, real experiences, not, research, but realness.
That's exactly what I learned 10 years ago, very
Yeah,
quickly, as soon as I transitioned, is people have no framework for this.
yeah,
And just simply explaining it
yeah.
in terms that people can comprehend goes a long way to changing their perspectives.
Wendy, that's why they don't want these messages and these stories to be part of the education system. What happens is when you tell these stories, it makes these things a possibility for people. It gives
Right.
them hope. It gives them permission to think what could be possible. So when we
Mhm.
strip these things from the education, when we're learning about the birds and the bees, and when we're learning about identity and stuff, to remove these things so they get no ideas, right?
Right. But what they don't
Can't
realize is that
censor,
the idea was there from the day they were born.
Yeah.
They
We're
just
born
don't have a
with this.
framework for it.
Because culture has become more open-minded to things that are different from, say, what our neighbor thinks, that more people are going to run towards this. People are this. We're
Hmm.
just now acknowledging and giving people the freedom to be who they are.
Right.
There's no going back. They'll be this even if you don't give them a platform. It's just going to be harder for them.
They're going to try and push us back,
Yeah.
but with the cell phones, the internet, and the connections that we have to each other, it's
Yeah.
going to be damn near impossible.
Yeah.
And just for perspective purposes, gay lost its diagnosis status as a psychological condition in 1973.
Yes, I remember.
Most people do not realize that 2012 was the date that happened for the transgender community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost 45 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's science. That is every smart doctor and physician and researcher coming get together to create something called the DSM, where we
Mhm.
diagnose all these disorders. And if we can't listen to what they say, right, versus what some political pundit says, I mean,
Right.
who are we going to believe?
Exactly.
One of the things that the political pundits are saying now is that they've created this research about people who are detransitioning and this body of work that really I don't think has much meaning, but maybe
No.
you can address that. What's the truth about people who are detransitioning?
Yes. I've had the pleasure to work with certain people that have shared a variety of stories. And the first thing that I want to say is that every story matters. Every story, whether somebody lives their life to the fullest this way versus someone who may not be, everyone deserves their story. What I've learned is that if you look at the research, and we won't stay on research, but just as a starting off point, the most recent research that has been done has said that of nearly 30,000 transitions, folks who have transitioned, 13% of them have detransitioned. Okay, so 13% of 27,000 to be exact. Of those 13%, only 2% report that the reason that they detransitioned was because it didn't feel right or it wasn't what they thought it would be. It didn't make them feel the way that they thought it would feel. 2%. The other 11% of people that have detransitioned, it's about things that we're not talking about. It's not about regret. It is about family rejection. It is about financial barriers to a certain life. And it is about fear of safety, fear of getting on that bus and seeing what's going to happen to me when I'm out in public. And if there was research done for these individuals who have gone through this process, that is what we're hearing. That is what we hear in therapy offices. So much of it is about other people aren't on board. The people that are supposed to love us and support us aren't on board. So we change our mind and we keep code switching. But I will say this, I also read recently that of all the people that have gender affirming procedures done, 1% of them regret it. And that is less than the number of people that regret traditional medical procedures such as knee replacements, hip replacements, childbirth. There is a larger number of people that regret those procedures than people that have done work to make their bodies what they should be.
Get their
When,
birth defects corrected.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
when we talk about detransitioning,
Yeah.
are there phases of that? Are we talking about only people who have had surgery, or are we talking about people who have transitioned
Oh, I
socially
mean,
with
it's
hormones?
yeah, hormones, puberty blockers, these things, and I don't want to speak out of turn too medically focused, but they're reversible. Kids that are on a journey, for the most part, these things are reversible. And that's another fallacy that with kids, that they're being rushed into these types of decisions. It is such a thoughtful, long, multi-step process of meeting with mental health experts, of meeting with doctors, psychiatrists. It's a process that nobody is going to get all the way through and then say, nah, it's just not true that kids are going to school one gender and coming home another. For anyone to think that that's true is just ignorant.
Totally.
Find me just one example of that, and then we can have a discussion about it.
Who would want this kind of attention?
Exactly. Who would put themselves out there to be ridiculed and to be talked about and to be discriminated against because they want attention?
That's why I said earlier, no little boy is going to do that.
Yeah.
So when we talk about detransitioners, it could be people who have transitioned socially or hormonally,
Mhm.
not necessarily, we're not talking about people who have only transitioned surgically. Is that right?
Yes, and I want to do a little bit more research on that, but what I can say is that if you start the process as a child or a teenager, everything that I've read has indicated that these things you can pause, you can change your mind, and you can kind of undo. And then things beyond that, I would say doctors should weigh in.
Because there's confusion. Wendy and I even did a short episode about what does it mean to transition, because people are confused about that.
Mhm.
There's so many stages of the transition, like you were talking about. There's so many stages that the young people have to go through that they may start transitioning socially. They may be wearing different clothes or change their appearance.
And I'm not sure it's that urgent or super important to define it. I think however people describe their transition, whether it's a social one, whether it's one where they first would go public with how they feel, I think everyone can define that their way. I guess medical transitions is maybe slightly different.
agree. I just think people don't understand. They think there's one thing that somebody does. One day you're this and you transition, the next day you're that. And so we're
Yeah.
trying to explain that there are differences and that transition means different things to different people. They're doing things different ways. And like you're saying, each one is unique. We should honor that. And some of it is none of our business. So
Right.
some of
Well,
it,
I mean, the governor who was running alongside of Kamala Harris had said, and I love what he said, if you don't like or know something about your neighbor, mind your business. You
yeah.
know, Tim
Do we
Walters,
quiz cis people like that?
right? Right? Yeah. Why is the default that we can butt our noses into other people's lives that are just a minority, a gay person, a trans person, a bi person? Why don't you do that with the next door neighbor over there?
Yeah, why do you think that you understand them, but you don't understand
Yeah.
the group that's supposedly just like you? I mean, we're all so unique. It's the human experience.
It would be boring if we weren't. If we were all
Right.
identical, there would be no interesting films, there would be no interesting books. It would be Pleasantville. Everything's just the same.
Yeah, we
Or the
don't need it.
Stepford Wives.
Or the Stepford Wives. Exactly.
David, let me take it back down to you for just a minute.
Yeah.
Your personal journey, what is it that surprises you most about your life to this point?
What surprises me most about my life, I thought everything would be fixed. And by fixed, I mean set, like set in stone. That the things that I decided, the things that I told myself when I was younger were rigid. This is the way it's going to be. And what I've learned in doing the work that I do and in talking to so many people is that life is never on either extreme. Life is what happens in the middle. Life is the gray area. That's where life is. Neither extreme of anything is right. It's the gray area. Nothing is black and white. We talk about binary. We're in a world where everything needs to be listed and categorized, and you got to be this or that. Most things don't fit in that way. The other thing that I'm most surprised by is every day you can change your mood, your energy. People that have a clinical diagnosis of something, it's certainly not that easy, but we can decide tomorrow I'm going to start over. Tomorrow I am going to go back to grad school and study something else. Again, those things take a certain amount of privilege, and I don't want to make it seem like it's easy for everybody to do certain things that cost money, but nothing's set in stone. The thing that I try to convey when I'm spending time with clients is that change is constant and change can be hard, but change can also be amazing. We worry about things so much, but what if when we worried, we said, okay, this is my worrying thought. What if we just added another thought of, or it can turn out really well, or it could be a great new job that pays more money and makes you feel even better about yourself, right? We're so inclined to, by design or just naturally go to the worst possible outcome. Okay, that's a part of your brain, but let's balance it out with the other. Let's balance it out with what could go well, what can go right, what could be good about moving or getting divorced or having another child. And because my own life has changed in those big ways, I thought it was going to be this way. I thought I was going to marry a woman, have a child, and then get divorced. That is what I told myself because I always wanted a child, and naive, young, silly, ignorant me just thought the only way that that was going to happen was with a woman, right? And so I would have the child, and then I'd be like, okay, I have what I need now. Let's get divorced. And so very young, but I say this as to remind people that things change, new things can be wonderful. Don't be so rigid. Don't be so set and think that you know everything. Because as soon as I sat back and realized I don't know much, that was when I became open to new stuff, coming out, putting myself out there to meet somebody, meeting my husband, deciding to have a child without having to marry a woman and get divorced. Deciding to leave advertising and go back to grad school. A lot of these things, there's some privilege there that I was able to do that. But the story that I'm trying to convey here is that things can always change. In 3 years, we may get a different person in office that is going to roll back all the things that somebody else has removed. And so we have to look forward. I believe that if you're living in the past, not really living, if you're living in the future, not really living, you're only really truly living in the present. I think we can learn from the past. I think we can plan for the future, but only right here and right now are we able to actually control stuff. We can't undo things in the past, and we don't have a magic crystal ball about the future. So I always try to get the people that I spend time with to understand if we're thinking so much about the future, we're robbing ourselves of being able to enjoy right now.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to enjoy right now. And so we can fantasize about what it might be like in the future. But being present and being grounded and taking what is as opposed to what you wish it would be like is a good place to start.
I like that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
So one last question.
Yeah.
What keeps you going? Because your job is not an easy one, and you see all kinds of different things. People who warned you at the beginning that you were too empathetic and probably going to take on too much. What is it that keeps you going, David?
Um, the Zoloft. No, I'm just joking. Thing that keeps me going is probably it changed once my son Max came into my life. From 14 years ago, from that day onward, there was no more selfish Dave. There was no more being concerned with what other people think. It became, I'm a father. Everything that I do is going to be to raise this little thing and make this thing strong and big. And that has been my focus. My reason for leaving advertising was, as I said, I wanted to be more fulfilled. I also wanted to be around for my kids' soccer games or karate tournaments. Advertising didn't always allow that to happen. I was traveling a lot. So 7 years ago, when there was still enough time to really raise my son, that was a big motivator. I didn't want to regret being the dad that missed a lot of things because I was making a lot of money or what seemed like a lot of money. So what motivates me, it's Max. I know that sounds cliche. That motivates me. I'm very motivated by security. By security, I mean stability, having a job, working hard, knowing that I'm going to make enough money to pay my bills and save a little bit of money. And that makes me feel kind of grown up. And when I think about the future, that's what I'm thinking about now. 401ks and that kind of thing. And the other thing is nostalgia. I'm very motivated about nostalgia. And I don't mean living in the past, I mean remembering the things that I always loved and creating space for them now, whether that be listening to a record I loved when I was 12 and playing it at a dinner party or during dinner, or remembering that I loved to oil paint when I was a kid. And now
Yeah.
I come home and I spend time with my family, and then my son goes to bed and my husband goes to bed. Sometimes I go downstairs and I oil paint, and it's relaxing. So I try not to forget the things that always brought me a little bit of joy. Because in therapy, we call it inner child work. Every time we do something that our 12 or 13-year-old self would have loved, it's sort of healing that 12 or 13-year-old. You know what I mean?
Very much so.
You
Yeah.
have a lot of skills from your profession that you're using on yourself.
I guess so. It's good because therapy can be expensive. So
Oh, well, David, is there anything else that you want to share with us today?
no, I think it was a lovely conversation and we touched on a lot of ground. If anything were to come up, if anyone who's listening has any questions for me, I'm sure we'll be able to get my contact information up or my website. Yeah.
We'll put your contact information in the show notes. You've got a beautiful website. Wendy, what else?
I'm really grateful that you agreed to come on and talk with us. And this has been fabulous. I really loved it. Thank you, David.
I'm glad. I'm so glad I enjoyed it too, and I will continue to watch. I know you have several podcast videos up that people can watch and learn from, and it's a very relatable thing. When I watched a couple of the podcasts, what I walked away thinking was, this is very relatable. This isn't throwing information at you, it's learning through real life stories. And I love that.
Right.
Well, thank
And
you. That's what we're
being
going for.
visible for others.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And Thanks to Wendy for everything you've done, Wendy, being so visible. David, we've really enjoyed this today. Thank you for this. And I know that the audience is going to get so much out of this. We touched on things for parents, some things for young people, and people who are still not sure about what this is all about. So I appreciate you helping us educate people for that. Well, to our audience, thank you for joining us today for another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. We've had such a great conversation with David Blacker today, and we know you're going to share it out. There's so many people who need to see this. So subscribe to our channel so that you get notification next time there's an episode. Be sure and watch our previous episodes. Like David said, there's some very interesting ones there. Push that little like button there so that the algorithms can kind of say, oh yes, people need to pay attention to this. And leave us comments. We'd love to hear your comments. You'll see our website on the trailer at the end of this. Go find our website, find our Facebook page, and tune in to the next time. So I'm one of your hosts, Lynn Murphy. Our other host, Wendy Cole. Thank you so much, Wendy, for doing this with me. And David, again, thank you. To our audience, we will see you next time. And remember to stay curious and stay kind. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.